agricultores, reconvirtiendo sus parcelas para el cultivo de girasol, y que a su vez le permita a una de estas marcas de papitas fritas bajar los contenidos de grasa en su producto, digamos. Entonces, hay una necesidad, digamos, que surge de una problemática de salud, con una oportunidad de un empresario interesado en apoyar también al agricultor, y la generación de todo un programa, de todo un proyecto. Ya va en su segunda fase y sigue incrementando hectáreas de cultivo para generarle mejores condiciones a ese grupo particular de agricultores que inicialmente sembraban maíz, pero que ven la oportunidad de hacer el cambio mental, es decir, salirse de lo tradicional, ir a un producto nuevo que elimine intermediarios y que tiene toda una cadena de valor preestablecida, lo que posibilita, y estamos seguros de ello, posibilitará un modelo de negocio rentable para ellos y la satisfacción de una necesidad social muy importante para todos. El siguiente, por favor, ya estoy terminando. Ya en conclusión, creemos que el desarrollo de competencias empresariales y organizacionales sí es un mecanismo importante para potenciar la modernización del campo, y como lo he reiterado en diversas oportunidades, el Banco le ofrece tanto al Gobierno Nacional, a las asociaciones gremiales y muy especialmente a todos ustedes en su calidad de agricultores, toda nuestra capacidad, todo nuestro interés y todo nuestro esfuerzo para ayudarlos en este propósito. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much for this opportunity of participating here in the symposium and to share with all of you some of the stages or the details in my experience as a promoter here in communities and projects. Well, first of all, I would like to point out that my first contact with social promotion was back in '62 in a process of promotion that the Mexican Secretariat carried out in a place called Tzitzícuaro in Michoacán, where I'm actually from, fostering the creation of the Proleversi Corporational, which sounds a bit Italian, the Proleversi. But this means like produce and vegetable farmers of Tzitzícuaro. It was very fancy, but that's what it means basically. And there was a popular bank carried out back then. And producers were organized, that was the main idea, and that this cooperational system was formed. For this outreach program, after I worked several years outside my town, I came back and I started working with my grandfather. And when this organization was formed, I said, well, this is a good thing, but he said he was too old and that I should better participate in it. So we started in this cooperative company, and because I asked a lot, I was working as an undersecretary for the administration committee. And because I was working in this savings account, I was head of the education committee, which gave me a chance to get more information, to get out, to attend to meetings such as this one, for instance. Furthermore, I was invited to take a course for a month on community development and cooperative companies. This happened in a context where there was practically no support to the farming. But I think that things arise when things get tough. I think that there are always people looking for alternatives. And this is the case of a priest that worked there, that had this education in the United States because all the seminaries here in Mexico were closed due to the Christian wars. He had a Jesuit background, so his point of view was really different. And from a dormant town, as we call it, as we say, of water, that it's dormant on the surface, but it was very active deep down. So he had a lot of promotion, fostering people's convenience, because there was many quarrels between people and different neighbors, which was not healthy at all. So this priest starts mobilizing people, transforming this cooperative society. And they start trying to support the producers, but as it turns out, they don't have resources, and those who promote it don't have resources either. And there are no agencies to go to. So the Mexican Social Secretariat, based here in Mexico, which were spreading this idea, calls to this group of entrepreneurs, and they talk about these issues, our issues mainly in the cooperative company, and they get a very good response. People are very enthusiastic, and when these entrepreneurs come to Ziritzicuaro, today we had the chance to meet one of them, who was actually there from the first group, was Mr. Gotzo. So when they appear, these entrepreneurs, it was sort of like Superman showing up. We had to see what we had to do. And the basic anecdote of all this personal financing to the state from the government. All in all, the main issue of this project was the cooperative and buying land. Back then, people didn't have that much land, and they had this joint of people who sold maybe 280 acres. And this group was integrated. So they started buying it, everyone with their best resources, but then these entrepreneurs started meddling. And they say, well, this is not going to get you anywhere. And they had to start a collective process that was against their philosophy and against their beliefs. So they changed the name to a rural enterprise. So then we weren't able to participate, all of us. Only those who wanted to work from very early to nighttime and in an orderly fashion, as an enterprise, really. And all of this caused the initial cooperative. People were very upset and they left, so this meant the end of the cooperative. However, a situation arose of this. They started pointing fingers, and who was guilty? The entrepreneurs. They said, well, you didn't work right. When we came here, this was already collapsing. So this led us to what? Which gave us a first approach to learning. We wanted to find the person responsible, and parallel to this was another group who wanted to know the causes. And the first stage of learning was that in the face of a problem we try to point fingers, and we forget to get into the depth of the situation. After the analysis that was made of what the causes were, is that the cooperative was open, which means that since it was the priest who was summoning people. It was very easy to get in. You only had to pay 40 pesos, and you could order as many tons of fertilizers as you wanted. And with all this enthusiasm of cutting it out big, people from different towns came, and during this process, the entrance process was lost because people would order fertilizer, let's say, using credit, and they would give it to other people. And out of this process, an analysis was made. So we started restricting the entrance. Not too much, but reasonably so. Maybe the entrance fee wasn't 40 pesos, was 200 pesos. So that was more expensive for other people. There was 20% advance payment for the fertilizer that was going to be bought. There were community societies. If not, it was a big society. In each one had a director. There was also another rule that each partner had to be supported by other two partners. And as people said in the morning, there were those who didn't have partners. And we would wonder why this happened. Doesn't anybody know this person? And they said, yes, the thing is that we know him, so we can guarantee for him. So all the system that came from failure, let's say, and for many of us this could have represented absolute failure and we could have just quit. However, with this entrepreneurial point of view, we managed to rescue the situation. And at that time, it was very, very much necessary to have this fertilizer to produce. And now we know that this needed to be modified, but back then that was the main need. So this experience repeated itself in many municipalities and even in several states. So we looked further. We didn't keep this aftertaste of defeat. We wanted to get the gist of the experience to be resolved and to create solid basis to keep on building. This was our biggest learning. For local producers, maybe our main issue was to solve the immediate problems. I don't know, how do you feel about this? Or maybe how do you feel about groups and associations? But the situation was that we had to figure out immediate problems. For several groups of people, professionists, of young people, and namely Mr. Arturo Espinosa, because back then we were all young. Well, we still are, at heart mainly, and there was another kind of energy back then. And to them, the main point was to find replicable models. Why? Because Siritzícuaro was just one case. However, this case reproduces itself by millions all throughout the country. From that aspect, we had several other models that came up, as the collective buying of fertilizers. We had the acquisition of machinery, cooperatives of small dairy producers, the common sale of arts and crafts. And these small models repeated themselves through sharing from one community to another. And many of these projects, namely fertilization, created networks that gathered many municipalities. And then this policy arose which was efficient and timely credit. And well, timely is a very desirable feature. But let me tell you, the main experience in this cooperative organizations was that there was support on fertilizers and pesticides. However, the farmers would pay and they would save really. They would create their own capital because thinking in the long run they had to have their own capital. They could not live on loans. But at some point they need these loans from harvesting, from preparing the land, all the way through the process. But when they had to pay, they had to give in their whole harvest. So they really didn't want to pay because they had no money left. However, there's this second opinion that they have this minimization of the debt. So there's this concept of responsibility of organization and capitalization. And that's when the associates started thinking that they had to give a certain fee and a certain percentage, and they had to be directives, go to meetings, and they had to pay. And some other places said, well, we won't go to the meetings and we won't accept the fees and we won't pay either. So what was the main effect? That all these organizations that were created were dismembered very easily. And it's like they said yesterday, because they have a credit line or a subsidized line, so many people go for subsides. And there were many interesting cases, such as the drilling for wells. There was an official institution that gave the plots and the lands, like they said, with a faucet, as they say nowadays. And those who were working with us would have requests such as, well, we want to make a well. And we would say, yes, but we have to get a permit, we have to have studies done and exploratory drillings for support. And certain things had to be gathered. And they had to oversee this drilling because they were charged by the meter, or because some other people could buy off this well. So they would follow this process very thoroughly, and so that they get to know the noise that the well makes. So in all the processes where people were handed the faucets, and when they asked why the wells were not working, they said, well, they lost a fuse. When? 3 months ago. And where are you getting it fixed? They say, well, the ministry hasn't been here. So this whole process, and I think it's very important, is that when people participate and are involved in these processes, they actually learn. And when things are ready-made and handed to them, they have no idea of how to use them. And this happened with some dairy producers beforehand. And the person that comes from FIRA is not here, but he would say the same. We're going to have collective purposes, collective stables, and tank systems, all the technique. And we would agree because they had a lot of money and we don't. So what are we able to do? Well, we will support the small producers that have 5 or 10 cows and help them integrate some kind of project so that they can build a house, support their credits for buying transportation, to go through all the buying process, and in so doing, they could earn more money with the product. And it is true that we were always talking about how producers could improve the technique and their methods, but they didn't know that until they realized, until they got their first profits. So then they wanted better cows and better constructions. But truth is that there was certain stimuli. Now they had more money. And what we can say when we visited with these fabulous collectives and cooperatives, and I used to tell people, well, these cows are quite beautiful, and they say, well, they don't belong to us. And like, whose are them? They are the banks, they would say. So what is yours then? And all they had was their homes. So when we went there, because they would invite you, and they used to have small plots with banks, with cows, and those were theirs. So what does this represent to us is that if people are not in the timely place or in the right spot for the size of the project, they will not get really involved. This will be the company's projects. And this is fundamental to know that a giant leap will not forcibly lead to many results. So going back to the entrepreneurial's point of view, they were looking for models, and from this process we had the service center, which means we were their guinea pigs in Siritzícuaro. Which was good. This was a fabulous experience to be able to participate in this process that started with a few bumps along the way. But there was a model that could be able to be duplicated in several states. In their search for the model and the pattern, they found other entrepreneurs, and if we motivated them, they could get involved. The initial motivation that they used was look behind your fences, look beyond your houses, look beyond your companies, which is to say, there's more people around. It's not about just your company and your family. There's society out there, and there's people who want to accomplish things too. And I would describe this as a fabulous experience. It was wonderful to have Gonzo and Lorenzo Servitje from Bimbo and the people from Comercial Mexicana, among others. And they used to visit often in our farm, and we would discuss the problems that arose. And I would think to myself, why do they bother coming and meddling in our business? If we would get organized, or if we didn't. So I would think, why do they do this? And when I said it, they said, well, for us, the situations are everyday situations. Situations like this come up in our factories, and we figure them out. And we want you to learn how to figure out problems. We don't want you to be intimidated by these problems. And this was a great contribution. It was looking further. And us, as Mexicans, we were used to running away from problems, especially in farms. We did not face them. And from all this repetition, from Centrals 1 and 2, we had the Mexican Foundation for Rural Development, which took up a role of assessment, definition, training, and shaping the ways of work, which had a presence in over 30 locations in the country. And this went from being all on our own in towns to being present in several places, which was amazing. We knew that many people were involved. and that many people received this kind of support.
Adelante. Un aprendizaje central de todo esto
The central lesson of all of this was that which solved the problem. It was all done through analysis. We proved what was needed. They needed credit, and we saw what happened with people who loan money individually. Second of all, when they lent money through the cooperative, that's why they went bankrupt, because they thought that credit would be the solution, but they went bankrupt. And the solution to the organization issues, and they couldn't figure this out, so they thought that maybe technicians were needed. So we reached an agreement, and the first technician was hired. But we saw that didn't quite solve the problem. We wondered then, what is it? And along the way, we found that these isolated situations really didn't produce a great effect.
Sino que la cuestión era lo que hoy llamamos la promoción.
But the central matter what was we call social promotion today, which is working directly with people. More than trying to solve things for them, was that people would get involved. To focus the outreach on people.
Se partió de lo que surgió como la necesidad, es que es lo que la gente quiere.
So then came the heartfelt need of this is what people want, and progressively this need didn't just stay there, it evolved and came to be the real needs, which is to say that maybe what I want is not what I need. It's maybe what I feel that I need, but it's not what's best for me. And from there, a whole analysis system came up. We had to analyze this proposition. We had to see what benefits we could get or what difficulties we could face. And finally, in this process, we analyzed and we came to see what resources we had, what kind of knowledge, and what kind of experience. So we connected all these elements that led to a project with a lot of potential. We also started from the standpoint of approaching it over people's knowledge. There was some reason behind why they were working in the land, and we took advantage of that. Another very interesting thing were cultural aspects. As it turns out, in one of the land buying projects, there were people that came from what we call the hill, the people that came from the raining land, and people from the irrigation areas. But on a smaller scale, one day maybe they were workers and they would work in the farm, and then the next day they would switch roles. But they worked from dusk till dawn.